My name is not something I will tell you. Names are leverage, and leverage is the only currency that has ever mattered in my profession. What I will tell you is what I am, because what I am is the only context that makes any of what happened make sense, and even then, it barely does. I am, or was, depending on how you measure these things, the best in the world at a specific and terrible skill. I have been doing it since I was 19 years old, recruited out of a military program that officially does not exist by an organization that officially does not exist, trained by people whose names I was never given, and deployed in the service of interests, so far above the level of governments that governments themselves are just instruments in someone else's hand. I have operated on 6 continents. I have never failed a contract. I have never been photographed, never been identified, never left behind anything that could be traced, analyzed, or used. I am exceptionally good at existing without being seen and at ending things that need to be ended cleanly and without remainder. I am telling you this not to impress you. I am telling you this so you understand that when I tell you what frightened me, you will know what frightened means when it happens to someone like me. The invitation arrived the way all serious things in my world arrive, through a channel so secure and so obscure that receiving it at all was proof the sender knew exactly who I was and exactly how to reach me, which meant the sender was either at the very top of the same world I occupied or was something adjacent to it that I had not previously mapped. It was not a letter. It was a file encrypted in a format I had seen used only twice before in my career, both times by organizations with resources that made nation-states look underfunded. The file contained 3 things: a number 12, a location, coordinates that resolved to a facility in the Norwegian mountains that did not appear on any satellite image I could access, which told me it had been actively scrubbed, which told me significant money and technical capability had been spent making it not exist, and a single line of text that said, "You have been selected. Attendance is not optional." I want to pause on that last line because it deserves attention. In my profession, very few things are actually non-optional. Most threats are leverage plays. Most ultimatums are negotiating positions. Most people who tell you attendance is not optional are people who have not yet encountered the specific consequences of trying to make attendance non-optional for someone with my particular skill set. I have walked away from governments. I have declined contracts from people who were not accustomed to being declined and have absorbed the consequences of that without meaningful difficulty. I read that line, "Attendance is not optional," and my first response was the calm professional assessment that whoever had sent this was either genuinely operating at a level I had not encountered before, or was about to learn something educational about the limits of their leverage. I ran the coordinates. I ran the encryption signature. I spent 4 days trying to trace the source of the file and found nothing, which was the most information I received, because finding nothing when I was looking told me exactly how much I was dealing with. I went to Norway. The facility was built into the mountain itself, not on it, not against it, into it, carved from the rock with an engineering precision that spoke of enormous resources deployed over a long period of time by people who did not need to explain themselves to anyone. The entrance was a door in a rock face that a person who did not know it was they would walk past without registering. I was met by 2 people who were clearly former military, clearly professional, and clearly not interested in conversation. They were polite. They were efficient. They took nothing from me, no weapons check, no search, which I understood immediately as a message. They were telling me that whatever I was carrying did not matter here, that the equilibrium of this place was not affected by what I had on my person. I have been in enough environments to know when that is a bluff and when it is not. This was not a bluff. There were 12 of us. I counted immediately, the way I count everything, the way I have counted everything since I was 19 years old, and someone taught me that the first 60 seconds in any new environment are the most important 60 seconds you will have, and that you should spend them cataloging rather than reacting. 12 people in a room that had been designed to be observed. Not obviously, not with visible cameras, but with the particular geometry of a space that has sight lines built into its architecture, that has been engineered for watching from positions that are not apparent to the people being watched. We were seated around a long table in a room that was carved from the same rock as the mountain and finished with a precision that was almost clinical, as though whoever had built it had decided that the aesthetics of function were the only aesthetics worth pursuing. The other 11 people in the room were the most dangerous group of human beings I had ever been in a confined space with. I knew 3 of them by reputation. One of them I had been contracted to locate and eliminate 2 years earlier, and had not been able to find, which told me something significant about her capabilities. We looked at each other across the table with the specific mutual assessment of people who recognize each other's category without knowing each other's details. The man who ran the briefing was not military and was not intelligence and was not anything I had a pre-existing category for. He was perhaps 60, ordinary looking in the way that very dangerous things are sometimes ordinary looking, dressed without affectation, speaking in the measured tone of someone accustomed to rooms that paid close attention to what he said. He told us, without ceremony and without the theatrical build-up that people with less confidence tend to use when delivering significant information, what we were participating in. He called it the program. He said it had been running for 11 years. He said 12 participants were selected each year from the global population of people who met the criteria. Criteria he did not define, but that we all understood because we were sitting in the room. He said there were 7 rounds. He said the last person standing received something he called the settlement. And he paused on that word in a way that suggested it had specific meaning that we did not yet have context for. He said failure at any round was permanent. He said this plainly and without drama, and the plainness of it was the most frightening delivery I had ever witnessed. The first round began the next morning. I had slept 4 hours in a room that locked from the outside, which I noted and filed away and decided not to spend energy on because the door was reinforced in a way that made engaging with it a poor use of my time, and the ceiling had a ventilation system that I spent 20 minutes assessing before determining it was not viable either. I ate the food they provided because not eating would have impaired my function, and my function was the only thing I had to work with. The first round was a trekking exercise in the mountain above the facility, a space of perhaps 4 square kilometers of Norwegian wilderness, heavily forested, in the dark, and negative 12 degrees Celsius. We were each given a transponder, a 6-hour window, and the information that there were 12 transponders active at the start, and the round ended when there were 11. I will not describe what happened in those 6 hours in detail. What I will tell you is that it ended in 4 hours and 20 minutes, that I was not the one who ended it, and that when we were returned to the facility, and I looked around the table at the 11 remaining faces, I began to understand that the person I should be most concerned about was not any of the 11 people sitting with me. It was the program itself. That was the realization that arrived in the second night in the locked room, while I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling and running everything through the part of my brain that I have spent 12 years training to find the pattern beneath the apparent pattern, the structure beneath the presented structure. Every competitive environment I had ever operated in had a logic, a set of incentives and constraints that, once mapped, allowed you to navigate with precision. Kill or be killed is a logic. Survive the longest is a logic. Complete the objective is a logic. Those are all comprehensible frameworks that a person with my training can work with. What the program presented on the surface was the same. Survive the rounds, be the last one standing, receive the settlement. Comprehensible, mappable. The problem was the man who ran the briefing, and the way he had said the word settlement, and the way the facility had been built, and the way the first round had been designed, not merely to eliminate one participant, but to make all of us watch the dynamic of what happened when 11 people with our particular skill sets were placed in a zero-sum environment. It had been designed to teach us something. I did not yet know what. Round 2 was different in a way that I felt before I understood. We were taken by elevator, a single elevator, descending for longer than the mountain's apparent depth should have allowed, to a level of the facility I had not previously accessed. The room we entered was large and circular, and the walls were screens, floor to ceiling, displaying footage. Security footage, from the look of it, grainy, time-stamped, multiple locations. I looked at the footage, and I recognized one of the locations immediately. It was my apartment. The one I kept in Lisbon under a name that did not connect to anything connecting to me, that I had swept for surveillance devices 6 days before receiving the invitation. The footage was live. A figure moved across my kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had been there before and had made themselves comfortable. And I watched this with the controlled stillness of a man who has trained himself not to react to provocations. And I understood that this was the point. The footage on the other screens showed locations belonging to the other 10 people in the room. Someone had been in all our spaces. Someone was in them now. The message was not subtle. The message was, we know everywhere you exist. We have been inside every safe space you thought you had. You have nowhere to go that we cannot reach, and we are showing you this now so that you carry it with you through every round that follows. I spent round 2 dismantling the psychological impact of what they had shown me, which was its own form of work, its own discipline. I am not immune to fear. No one is, regardless of what they tell you about themselves, and anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or has never encountered the specific thing designed to frighten them specifically. What I am is trained to metabolize fear quickly, to convert it from paralysis into information, to ask what the fear is telling me about the environment, rather than letting the environment use the fear against me. What the footage told me was that the program had resources and reach that exceeded anything I had previously worked alongside or against. What it told me about the people running, it was more interesting. You do not show someone your surveillance of them unless you want them to know you have it. You want them to know you have it when you want them to feel contained. You want them to feel contained when containment serves your purpose. The program wanted us to feel that there was no exit, no option, no play except the one they had designed. That was the real round 2. Not a location, not a physical challenge. A message delivered with surgical precision to exactly the people who would understand every implication of it. I understood every implication of it, and I began carefully, methodically, to look for the thing they had not intended me to see. By round 4, I had built a model of the program that I believed was more accurate than the one they had presented to us. The rounds were not what they appeared to be. They were assessments, elaborate, multi-layered assessments of specific capabilities that went beyond the physical, beyond the tactical. They were measuring something else, something about how we thought, how we processed, how we responded to specific categories of pressure. I could see it in the design of each challenge, the way it pushed on different pressure points, the way the parameters shifted in directions that made no tactical sense unless you understood that the tactical element was not the actual test. We were being evaluated, not for survival, for something more specific than survival. And by round 4, when there were 7 of us left, and I had been through enough of the design to start reading its intentions, I had developed a theory about the settlement that I did not share with anyone. A theory that frightened me in a way I had not been frightened since I was 19 years old and first understanding what I was being trained to become. The woman I mentioned earlier, the one I had been contracted to find 2 years ago and couldn't, her name inside the program was 7. We had all been assigned numbers at intake, and most of us used them because names were still leverage, and leverage was still currency. 7 was extraordinary in the way that very few people in our profession reach. The kind of extraordinary that is not just skill, but something architectural, something built into the way she processed the world. We spoke 3 times in the facility's common areas during the hours between rounds, brief conversations conducted in the mutual awareness that we were always being observed, that everything said was data being collected by someone. On the third conversation, on the night before round 5, she said something very quietly while looking at the wall and not at me. She said she had figured out what the settlement was. She said she had figured it out in round 3. She said she was trying to decide if knowing was better than not knowing. She did not tell me what it was that night. Round 5 began 6 hours later, and 7 did not come back from it, and I spent the night afterward in my locked room, understanding that she had made her decision about whether knowing was better than not knowing, and that the decision she had made told me, with horrible clarity, what the settlement was. There were 5 of us going into round 6. I knew all 4 of the others by that point, with the specific intimacy of people who have shared extreme circumstances without ever becoming allies. We were not allies. We were never allies. The structure of the program made alliance a liability rather than an asset, which I believe was intentional, which I believe was part of what was being assessed. The man who ran the briefings appeared before round 6 and said something he had not said before any previous round. He said that round 6 was different from the preceding rounds in that there was no elimination. He said round 6 was observational only. He said this with the same measured calm he applied to everything, and I watched the other 4 people in the room process it, and I watched myself process it, and I understood immediately and with complete certainty that he was lying. Not about the structure of the round. He may have been telling the truth about that. He was lying about the reason for telling us. You do not tell people under extreme competitive pressure that a round carries no elimination risk unless you want to observe what they do when they believe they are temporarily safe. The round itself was the lie. The observation was what was real. I will tell you what I found in round 6. We were taken to a part of the facility I had not accessed, a level below the circular room with the screens, accessible by a secondary staircase that we had not been shown previously. The room at the bottom was unlike anywhere else in the facility. The rest of the place was carved rock and engineered precision, functional, and cold. This room was different. It was old in a way that did not match the facility around it. Not old in the sense of aged construction, but old in the sense of a space that had been in use for a very long time, that had accumulated something in its walls and its floor, the way old places accumulate the residue of everything that has happened in them. The walls here were not rock. They were lined with something dark that absorbed the low light rather than reflecting it. There were no screens, no visible cameras, no equipment of any kind. There was a table at the center of the room with 5 chairs, and on the table were 5 folders, one in front of each chair. We sat. We opened the folders. And I understood, reading what was in mine, why 7 had made the decision she had made. The folder contained a contract. Not a contract in any form I had previously encountered. Not a document with parties and terms and signatures. Something older than that, structured in a language I could read, but that felt like it had been translated from something that did not originally exist in any human language. It described the settlement, not as a reward, as a transition. The program was not a competition. It had never been a competition. It was a selection process, running for 11 years by the man who ran the briefings, but the man who ran the briefings was not its architect and was not its primary interested party. The settlement, the contract explained, was absorption. The last surviving participant did not receive anything. The last surviving participant became something. A component in a system that had been operating far longer than 11 years, that had been selecting and absorbing people with specific capabilities for a period of time the contract described in a unit of measurement I did not recognize and that I have since been unable to identify in any reference I have accessed. The program was not run by a person or an organization in any sense that those words apply to human institutions. The man in the briefing room was an interface, a point of contact between the process and the participants. What ran the process was the thing that wanted what we had. Not our skills, not our capabilities, not our training. Something more specific and less nameable than any of that. Something that our particular history of existing in the space between life and death had produced in us. A quality of being that the contract described with a word I will not write here, because I do not think it is safe to write, that I have not spoken aloud since I read it. That Seven had read 3 rounds earlier, and that had led her to the decision she made in round 5. I sat at the table with the folder open in front of me for a long time. The other 4 people in the room were doing the same, reading, processing, being very still in the way that people are still when the stillness is the only thing between them and something they cannot afford to react to openly. One of them closed his folder carefully and aligned it precisely with the edge of the table and sat with his hands flat on the surface and looked at the wall. I recognized that stillness. I had produced it myself at certain moments in my career when the information I had just received was large enough that the only way to hold it was to make the body very quiet and give the mind somewhere to work. I looked at the man running the briefing, standing at the edge of the room with his hands clasped, and I understood that the observational element of round 6 was this room. This moment, 5 people reading a document that told them what they had actually been participating in for the past weeks, and that what was being observed was not our reaction, but our decision. What we chose to do with what we now knew. I thought about Seven. I thought about the specific decision she had made to remove herself from the process in round 5 rather than continue, toward the settlement rather than become the last one standing and be absorbed into whatever the contract described. I had not understood her decision at the time. I understood it completely now, and I thought about my own decision with the cold, methodical clarity that has kept me alive across 12 years and 6 continents, applying to this situation the same analytical framework I apply to everything, stripping it down to its operational components. What are the options? What are the costs? What are the probabilities? There were 3 options. Continue in the program and potentially become the last one standing and receive the settlement that was not a reward. Exit the program in the way Seven had exited, permanently, on my own terms in round 5, rather than someone else's terms in round 7. Or find the option they had not shown me, the one that exists in every environment if you look at the architecture from the right angle. The door that is not on the blueprint because it was not intended to be found, but was created anyway by the specific constraints of the structure around it. I chose the 3rd option. I will not tell you how I found it, because I do not know who is reading this, and I do not know who. The man in the briefing room is monitoring, and I do not know the full extent of what the program can reach, or how long its attention persists once it has been directed at something. What I will tell you is that the facility, for all its engineering and its scrubbed satellite imagery and its depth beneath the Norwegian mountain, was built by people. The man in the briefing room was a person, or was something that used a person's body and a person's mannerisms, and was therefore subject to a person's limitations. And the thing that ran the process behind him, the thing that had been selecting and absorbing across a span of time, the contract described in units I could not identify. That thing had designed the program for people with our capabilities, had assessed us across 6 rounds for the specific qualities it was interested in, and had in doing so revealed, with the precision of something that has been doing a thing for a very long time and has developed absolute confidence in its method, exactly how it thought, what it valued, what it was optimized for, and therefore exactly where the gap was. I got out. I am not going to tell you more than that, and I want to be honest that I do not know with certainty what got out means in the context of the program and its reach and the span of attention of what ran it. I do not know if I am out in any permanent sense. I know I am not in the facility. I know I am not in Norway. I know that when I ran my current location against every database I have access to, nothing came back that connected to anything the program had touched, which either means I am genuinely clear or means the program has no interest in whatever I accessed in round 6 being used as the basis for a report like this one. I have considered that possibility. I have decided to write this anyway because the alternative is being the only person who knows. And being the only person who knows is its own form of the containment they were trying to engineer. And I have spent my entire adult life refusing containment. Here is what I know. The program is real. It has been running for 11 years that I can verify, and for longer than that in forms I cannot verify, but have reason to believe existed. It selects 12 people per cycle from a global population of individuals who have spent significant portions of their lives operating in the space between life and death in a professional capacity. Soldiers, intelligence operatives, assassins, people whose work has given them a particular relationship with mortality that produces, apparently, something the thing behind the program considers valuable enough to have been collecting across a span of time that the contract measured in units no living human being uses. 11 cycles of 12 people. 1 settlement per cycle. The math is not complicated. I do not know what happens to the people who receive the settlement in any concrete, verifiable sense, because the nature of the absorption the contract described was not something that leaves a body. It does not leave anything, which is why, when participants are eliminated in the rounds, they leave evidence, physical, traceable, findable by anyone who looks in the right places in the Norwegian mountains. And when the last participant receives the settlement, there is nothing. 11 years of one person per year, gone without remainder, without trace, without the physical evidence that even the cleanest professional exit leaves behind. Gone in a way that I, who have spent 12 years making people disappear professionally, recognize as something outside my capability. Something outside any human capability I have ever encountered. I am the world's greatest assassin. I have operated without detection for 12 years. I have been in environments designed by governments and organizations with the resources of governments, and I have found the door that was not on the blueprint in every single one of them. I found it here too, and I am telling you this from wherever I am, which I will not name, and I am telling you because I think the 11 people who went into the settlement across 11 cycles deserve to have someone say that they existed, that they were real, that they were the best in the world at a terrible and specific thing, and that what happened to them was not a competition and was not a choice, regardless of what the contract in the folder presented it as. I am telling you because 7 made a decision that I understand completely, and that I am not certain I would not have made if I had read that contract 1 round earlier than I did. And I think she deserves to have someone say her name into the record, even a name that was only a number. I am telling you because the program is still running. I got out in round 6, and there is a round 7 scheduled, and there are 4 people still in that facility in the Norwegian mountain. And I do not know their real names, and I could not reach them if I did. And there is nothing I can do with that knowledge except put it somewhere outside myself and trust that the world is large enough and strange enough that somewhere in it there is someone who knows what to do with it. I am the world's greatest assassin. I have never failed a contract. I have never been identified. I have never left behind anything that could be traced. But I was in that room. I read that contract. I looked at the face of the man in the briefing room, and I saw what was behind it. Not a person, not an organization, not anything that exists in the taxonomy of threats I was trained to assess and counter. Something that has been patient in a way that makes the patience of the oldest human institutions look frantic. Something that found, in the particular category of human being that I represent, something worth collecting, worth waiting for. Worth designing an entire architecture of selection and assessment around, cycle after cycle, year after year, with the absolute confidence of something that has never failed to receive what it came for. Until now, I got out. I do not know what that cost. I do not know what it will cost. But I know that somewhere in Norway, in a mountain that does not appear on any map, in a room lined with something that absorbs light, 4 people are sitting at a table with folders open in front of them. And I know what they are reading. And I know, with the particular certainty of someone who has already read it, that what comes after the reading is the only decision that will ever matter more than any decision they have made before. I hope they find the door. I hope there is still a door to find. I hope that whatever is running the program has not, in the time since I found it, thought to close it. I hope this, and I know that hope is not a strategy, and I write it down anyway because there is nothing else I have to offer them except the fact that I got out, that it was possible, that the door existed, that someone found it and walked through it and is, as of the writing of these words, still here, still thinking, still refusing containment. Still, against every probability, the program was designed to eliminate alive.